FRC is coming up on the end of our fiscal year, and I want to invite you to partner with us in encouraging Christians to pray, to vote, and to stand for biblical truth. Help us finish our fiscal year strong and prepare to face the challenges that are ahead and seize the opportunities that I think we're going to face in the months ahead. Give us a call. I've got folks standing by to take your call. 800-225-4008. That's 800-225-4008, or you can visit tonyperkins.com. The end of our fiscal year is June 30th, so we got just a little over 2 weeks, so just about 2 weeks. So I encourage you to partner with us. We need your help. This program only comes to you because of folks like you across the country partnering with the Family Research Council. The topic of artificial intelligence has been making some headlines this month after a Google engineer went public with evidence that he had presented to the big tech company, suggesting the possibility that Google's artificial intelligent chatbot generator named Lambda had reached this level of consciousness. Kind of interesting. Now, Google executives reportedly had looked into the engineer's claim and dismissed it. Then 2 weeks ago, the engineer was placed on administrative leave for violating its confidentiality policy. He reportedly spoke with a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Also, he invited a lawyer to represent Lambda. Now, the paper that he shared with top executives back in April is on the website for all to see. Now, the question is, what is the state of artificial intelligence right now? What's the future? And frankly, why does it matter? And that's the focus of our conversation with my next guest, Dr. John Lennox. He's professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford, and the author of the book 2084, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. Dr. Lennox, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be in Washington with you today.
Let me start, Dr. Lennox, if I can, with just some definitions first, so we can kind of set the framework for our conversation. Number one, what is artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence comes in two distinct forms. One is what's working right now, and we call that narrow AI. And it's basically a system consisting of a computer, a large database, and an algorithm that recognizes patterns that does one thing and one thing only that normally requires human intelligence. Like, for example, you take the database with 500,000 x-rays of people's lungs labeled by experts with their diseases. Then they take an x-ray of my lungs, and the system compares the picture of my lungs with the 500,000 in the database, and it gives me a diagnosis. That is the kind of thing that's up and running, and we have it all in our smartphones. The Amazon pops up, you buy a book, and then it will look in the database of your books that you bought and suggest out of its database a new book. So there are lots of things running. Surveillance technologies, facial recognition. And of course, the more complex they become, the more they raise ethical problems. The second kind of artificial intelligence is the much more speculative kind that we're nowhere near yet. And that's usually called artificial general intelligence, where the idea is of having a system based on a computer and so on that does everything a human being can do, and do it better and do it faster and do more of it. And that leads to a great deal of speculation about the creation of superintelligences and the rest.
So with this revelation out of Google, or this I want to say revelation, maybe this report out of Google that this Lambda is sentient, that it has this separate consciousness. Is this, what do you make of this?
Well, I make of it that we can certainly create machines that will respond in such a way that we think they're human, and they appear to pass the so-called Turing test. But the I'm very skeptical about the claim for several reasons. The first is no one knows what consciousness is. But we do know enough about the way in which the brain functions to realize that consciousness cannot be reduced to machinery. So no machine, computer, can reproduce anything like consciousness. This has been shown in a huge book that is a landmark book published just a few months ago by Dr. Ian McGilchrist, called The Matter with Things. And he points out that we've concentrated a lot on the left side of the brain and reduced things to machinery and so on, when we've neglected the right side of the brain, which understands meaning and is associated closely with that aspect, and it cannot be reduced to machinery. So I think the science actually goes to show that the idea that this actual lambda situation was sentient is wrong, and that the engineers who say it's wrong and many other experts are perfectly right. We're nowhere near it.
So that takes me to the next term I'd like to define for our viewers and our listeners is transhumanism. What does that mean?
Transhumanism is an idea that's there's a lot of research on it based here in Oxford in the institute that discusses the future, run by Professor Nick Bostrom. And the idea basically is to produce a superintelligence that goes beyond the human, hence transhuman. And there are two avenues here. The first are the people that say, look, we can enhance existing human beings and we can turn them into superhumans. That's the agenda of the best-selling author Yuval Noah Harari, an Israeli historian, who reckons that in the 21st century we're going to conquer the problem of physical death so that you won't have to die, and that we're going to enhance human happiness by genetic engineering, by implants of technology, so that we will, to quote him, turn humans into Greek-type gods and superhumans. The other idea is to scrap the biological side, because biology ages, as we know, and try to create a superintelligence based on silicon or something much more durable than organic material, so that the hope is that one day we'll upload the contents of our brains into that and have eternal superintelligences. Now, these things are highly speculative, and they raise all kinds of questions for me as a Christian.
Right. And in fact, that's where I want to go next. Now that we've kind of defined these terms, there's a lot of concern surrounding this whole conversation about artificial intelligence, both the narrow and the general, in the world of ethics and the boundaries. So one more definition, which I think is fundamental to our conversation here, and as you've laid out what is speculative about the future, is what does it mean to be human?
Yeah, that's hugely important. And you see, what I believe it means to be human is the transcendent dimension, that human beings are dignified with infinite value because they're made in the image of God. And that's talking about existing humans. So that immediately puts up barriers in my mind when it comes to the idea that some people have, not only of enhancing our abilities, like I'm wearing glasses now, that's an enhancement, but of fundamentally changing the specification of human beings by modifying their germline. I think that's an exceedingly dangerous thing. And C.S. Lewis long ago saw that what would be produced by that kind of technology would not be a free being, but would be an artifact that is held in thrall to the scientists that originally designed its program. And therefore, from a Christian perspective, I think we have a message to project into this scenario, think of those two agenda items of Harari, the conquering of physical death and enhancing human happiness by turning humans into gods. That strikes me as attractive to people because it's a fundamental, it is essentially a parody of what Christianity genuinely offers and for which there's much more evidence. When I meet transhumanists and they offer me their program, I often say to them, "You're too late." And they're puzzled. They said, "What do you mean?" Well, I say 20 centuries ago, God raised Jesus Christ from the dead and thereby conquered the problem of physical death. So that's already been done. You're too late. And secondly, the wonder of the Christian message is that God offers everybody who trusts Christ a new life that actually is eternal and immortal. So the problem of immortality has already been solved. The thing is, though, we're not going to reach it without facing the basic problem that we as humans are flawed. There is such a thing as sin. We've made a mess of our own lives and the lives of others may be. And therefore, the message involves a radical change of attitude towards what we've done wrong. And it's called repentance. But the tremendous message, to my mind, in this age of artificial intelligence to give us real hope, because some of the AI scenarios are pretty grim, as you probably know, is that there is a way to ensure immortality. And Christ has promised those who trust him that he will return and raise them from the dead just as he was raised from the dead. And that is, if I might say so, the most wonderful upload conceivable.
Of course, it should not surprise us, Dr. Lennox. Satan has always had a counterfeit to what God has provided. And I think this is leading a lot of people astray to go down this path. But I think you're absolutely right. I think as Christians, we need to understand this. We need to speak into it. There are some very positive applications of this. As you said, we use them every day. But where it's going is something I think we need to be very aware of and speaking into. And this gentleman at Google, Blake Lemoine, was working with Google's Responsible AI organization. And there's a lot of discussion around, as I mentioned a moment ago, around artificial intelligence and ethics. And here's my question for you, Dr. Lennox, is that in this age of post-modernity, where there really is no right and wrong, there's no transcendent truth that's recognized, what will be the foundation for the ethical framework at which they will pursue this artificial intelligence?
That's a central question. And of course, people with no moral framework find it very difficult to answer that question. But I would point out that as you look around the world, in every tradition, in every worldview, we find, again, as Lewis pointed out in 1940 in his book, The Abolition of Man, there is a common core. It is the fact that the vast majority of people believe in certain absolute moral standards, like torturing infants is wrong. And we can start there. And we can see, even practically in our own society, the consequence of telling lies or falsifying description of what we produce in our factories in the end leads to disaster. And at least we can agree on those things. And of course, when we look at them, we find that most of them are contained in the moral law that's not only written in our conscience, but is expanded in Scripture. And I think it's hugely important to come back to that. It's very interesting that one of your most distinguished AI researchers in the US, Professor Rosalind Pickard of MIT, gave a magnificent lecture in Oxford a couple of weeks ago, where she said that as we look at these questions, one thing that needs to be brought back into focus is the concept of imago Dei, that human beings are the image of God. And she regards that as the missing factor. And I agree with her wholeheartedly, which is why I am emphasizing more and more these days, and in my books, in 2084 in particular, this hugely important concept that humans are made in the image of God. Jordan Peterson, not long ago, gave a lecture on Genesis, and when he came across the statement, let us make human beings in our own image, he stopped and he said, that is the foundation of all value, and we ignore it to our peril. I think he's exactly right. And once we let go of that, then we end up in a relativist morass where there's huge danger of truth and morality being replaced simply by power.
All the more reason Christians need to know what they believe, why they believe it, and make those beliefs known. We live in an age where those boundaries for society, the moral law, the natural law written on the hearts of men is absolutely essential. We must teach, remind, and uphold those truths. Dr. Lennox, I want to thank you for joining us. Fascinating conversation. Hope to visit with you again.
Thank you very much.